Japanese trains have a problem. While they are incredibly efficient, once you start using them daily, there are hidden problems you'll start to notice. Rush hours have been getting worse than ever, and now tensions between the people have reached a whole new level. Even Nuisance Influencers have made commuting in Japan a living hell when the country already had a problem with Chikan, people who sexually harass women on the train. And this is just the beginning. Public transportation has turned into a battleground between the foreigners and the Japanese, while the station staff have to deal with Toritetsu, local train fanatics who have been caught ganging up on people who come between them and the trains. One such person being Dylan, a foreigner whose life was changed forever after he ended up in an altercation with the Toritetsu, who we will later on in this video meet in person. We will be going in depth in all of these issues and even some heavier ones that I haven't revealed yet, including the time I myself had to deal with a Chikan. Since we have a lot to talk about, it's better if we get started, and there's no better place to start than with the most modern problem Japan is having, the nuisance influencers. Now, I'm not going to claim that nuisance influencers are something that people have to deal with every time they board the train here in Japan, but if you've been following my channel, you might have noticed that most of these nuisance influencer situations seem to take place in public transportation. And there's a reason for it. In Japan, when anything happens during the rush hour, everyone will just keep to themselves and mind their own business. This is why even if a nuisance influencer were to cause ruckus somewhere in public, most of the people will simply ignore them and they aren't able to get the reactions they want to their videos. However, when these same influencers start harassing people in a public train, everyone inside is stuck in the train with them and they have no option but to react to them. And the biggest problem in all of this is that it works. Every time one of these morons decides to make a scene, it's almost always bound to end up on the news. News stories like this then cause irreversible long-term damage to the reputation of foreigners like you and me who simply want to respectfully travel here. And despite all of this, I regularly get comments asking why a middle-aged guy like me would hate on someone like Sigmaboy who's just having some harmless fun. First of all, playing shitty music out loud on the train isn't funny, and I know what funny is. I look in the mirror every day. This is something anyone can understand once they become a middle-aged 30-year-old boomer like myself. Another comment I received was, why does it matter when he acts like this in Japan when he does the same exact thing in other countries? And the answer to that is quite simple. The rules are different here. And trust me, I get it. Not every nuisance behavior is the same, because while some people like Johnny Somali act maliciously, some people simply are just too stupid to realize what they're doing is out of line. But in the end, it doesn't matter if you're acting maliciously or not, because both end up having the same negative effect of showing anyone who watches them that they too can become famous overnight by harassing people around them. While these nuisance influencers are the extreme cases, the truth is they're just tip of the iceberg when it comes to the problems that Japan's public transportation is having these days, all of which we will get to later on this video. And speaking of extreme behavior, there is another group of people that for a long time have been causing chaos in Japan. Railway photographers, better known locally as Toritetsu, are a group of fanatics whose main objective is to take the best photos of trains they can. While at first glance it's seemingly an innocent hobby, once you realize who you're dealing with, you'll start understanding why the trouble section takes up 90% of the Toritetsu Wikipedia page. These people are notoriously way too into their hobby, meaning they'll do anything and everything to get their photos, such as fight with the train station staff, run on the tracks, cut trees from a private property to have a clear view of the train, and even pull the emergency brakes just to be able to take a better picture like what happened here. Now obviously, I'm not saying every railway photographer in Japan is as crazy as these guys are, but it is common enough that Toritetsu has essentially become a derogatory term and almost everyone online makes fun of them. Not only are Toritetsu causing chaos at the stations, but they are also constantly interrupting the traffic and making trains run late because they have the tendency to sneak into areas where they aren't supposed to be and run on the tracks, which forces the drivers to stop as a precaution. One of the most notorious Toritetsu meltdowns happened in Kamakura, where people had gathered to photograph the famous Enoden train line. However, once the train arrived from behind the curb, something unexpected happened. Yep, that's Dylan. You're probably wondering how he got here. Dylan is a resident of Kamakura and runs his own home taco bar restaurant in the area. He was on his way home from work, not thinking much of the train he was cycling next to, and once he arrived from behind the curve, he saw around 50 people pointing their cameras at him, to which his natural reaction was to wave at them. Only to realize it wasn't him they were trying to photograph. What happened to him next is one of the craziest things that can happen to a foreigner in Japan, but we'll get back to it later once we visit his restaurant and hear it from the man himself. Dylan, however, isn't the only foreigner getting in trouble, since recently Japanese trains have become a battleground between the tourists and the locals. Just in the past decade, the number of tourists has quadrupled with no end in sight. The reason for this, in my opinion, more than likely is the fact that today, the generation who grew up watching anime are turning into their 20s and 30s and finally have the buying power to visit the country themselves. With this many people traveling here, the over-tourism problem has been a huge talking point in the news, and the constant barrage of negative headlines involving tourists has turned many local people hostile towards foreigners. Japanese trains have an incredible amount of strict rules that most tourists don't know about. No rushing on the train, no eating, no talking on the phone, just to name a few. When the millions of tourists visiting Japan inevitably end up breaking these rules, it creates a lot of friction with the local people who are already riled up against foreigners due to the news, which causes clashes in the train daily.
Why you foreigners always do like this? Block the street? You are fucking racist, I think. You miss out on Japanese people, right? Why? Why do you like this? Answer me!
One of the biggest points of contention has been tourists bringing their luggage with them, like is happening in this video, where a man is crashing out to a group of tourists having their bags out on the aisle, blocking the road completely. When it comes to luggage, I myself am sympathetic towards tourists. Even though there are alternative ways of handling things, like taking a taxi or sending your bags through mail, sometimes you just have no alternative but to take it with you, and I don't think the people themselves are too happy either, having to navigate the busy public transportation system with their belongings. I'm not saying people can't be inconsiderate with how they handle their bags in the train, but sometimes you just might end up in a lose-lose situation. Now, in case you are wondering how you can avoid a crash out from a Japanese salaryman inside the train, I would say the two best things you can do is to be as quiet as you can and to take as little space as you can. In general, when you're inside the train, keep your backpack in a place where you don't end up accidentally hitting people with it, and if you have larger luggage, umbrellas, or whatever you name it, just try your best to keep them out of other people's way. When it comes to noise, even though talking on the phone is frowned upon, talking to other people is completely fine as long as you keep your volume reasonable, and I have to say, every now and then you do see foreigners who are being a bit too uncomfortably loud. Of course, there are many more rules when it comes to train etiquette, but I feel like these are the two cardinal sins that end up causing the most trouble between the foreigners and the locals. One thing that requires mentioning though is that even though tourists end up breaking these rules more, it's not like the Japanese themselves are completely innocent. Every time you go out, you're bound to see locals sitting on the floor, kicking things, being drunk as hell, you name it. Even on my recent Butskari video, I talked about how Japan has a growing problem of individuals flipping out and physically assaulting people, which many times ends up taking place in the trains due to the fact that since the rules are so strict, many think they have the right to harass or assault those who they deem to not be following the rules. Foreigners definitely end up breaking these unwritten rules more than the locals do, but let's not forget that the people here are human beings just like the rest of us and fully capable of not following them just like us. The fact is that none of us will be able to follow these rules all the time and we're going to mess up. But that is not something to worry about since none of us are perfect and all we can do is simply try our best. Until now, we've been talking about kinda modern problems. Annoying, sure, but ultimately surface level. And next, I want to talk about the real issues, the ones that have been part of Japan's public transportation for decades. Groping on the train that is done by those who Japanese people call chikan is often a topic that is quickly brought up when social problems of Japan are mentioned. Even though there are many people online who vehemently say the issue is overblown, something I've noticed even in my own comment section, the fact of the matter is that around half of the women living in urban areas have had to deal with a chikan at least once in their lives. With the public transportation being incredibly packed during the rush hour and Japanese generally having non-confrontational attitudes towards social situations, it is very easy for men to grope women on the train without having to worry about getting caught doing so. I've had many people in my personal life sadly confess to me that they've also been a victim, and even I myself have witnessed it happening right in front of me. I was out in Tokyo with a friend of mine riding the train on the evening, and even though it wasn't the rush hour, it was busy enough that everyone was kinda crammed in together. We were standing at the middle section in front of the doors and just kinda hoping to get to our destination fast, because being stuck in the train in between sweaty salarymen isn't the most fun experience. After a while out of boredom, I started to look around me and I noticed a woman slightly behind me with a man who was like really close to her, like pretty much touching her. And I thought it was weird because even though there were many people, there weren't that many that you had to like stand that close to each other. Now, I'm not one to body shame others considering how I myself look, but to put it bluntly, the man looked creepy. And because I don't want to judge other people by the way they look, I just thought like, okay, maybe they're a couple, maybe they know each other, like, what do I know? But when I looked at the woman, it was pretty clear that she was being really uncomfortable with the situation, just trying to look somewhere else while the man was staring at her and breathing down her neck. I whispered to my friend like, am I being crazy or is something wrong with this? And he just kinda gave me the look like, yeah, like something's going on. Now, I don't know if anything else was going on other than him just being way too close to her and overall creepy. However, there didn't seem to be any movement with his hands or any other indication that something more serious was going on. But whatever was happening, it wasn't cool. So when the next stop came, I felt like I had to do something. Now, maybe I should have done something more. I don't know. This was my first time ever witnessing anything like this, and all I knew was that the least I could do was to stop what was happening at that moment. So when people were getting out at the next stop and there was this general movement in the train, I somewhat forcefully pushed myself in between them, just kinda pretending that I was making way for people to get out. Then I kinda forcefully, using the handrail as a leverage, pushed the man behind me like further back to give the woman, more space, while pretending I was just a dumb foreigner at the train. And in the end, I can be sure that whatever was happening was uncool, because when the woman left the train, she gave me a small nod as a thanks. Sadly though, due to people's non-confrontational attitude, it is rare for someone to step in like this, even if they are able to witness it themselves. This is why many were originally very supportive of people like Ren Nakajima, the anti-groping YouTuber who we talked about in our last video. What makes people like Nakajima start fighting against Chikan by themselves is the fact that even though Japan has implemented women-only cars, always-on camera shutter, and anti-voyeurism measures inside the stations, it still isn't enough to stop the rising number of Chikan. Another huge negative factor in the issue is that the majority of victims, around 80%, never report their cases to the police. And even if they went ahead and tried to make a report, it is commonly known that the Japanese police can be quite unresponsive to sexual harassment cases, which is one of the main factors to underreporting. This is of course anecdotal, but even I myself have had to deal with a stalker to which I didn't receive any help, and I was simply told to come back another time, which I felt like just was a way of shooing me off. This is the reason why regular citizens take it upon themselves to fight against sexual harassment during the rush hour by doing citizen arrests inside the train stations and posting them on YouTube to try and raise awareness to the issue. There is another topic I've been struggling if I want to talk about or not, but considering it's something I've also had to deal with myself, I feel like I should at least say something. If you've ever been as unfortunate as me, you might have been stuck on a train that's not moving for hours due to a so-called personal injury. This doesn't always mean the worst, but most of the time when a train has stopped due to this reason, it is because someone has jumped under the train. Japan is a country where sadly mental health care is not taken seriously enough, even though, according to the studies, 30% of people feel isolated in their lives. Because of overwork, unrealistic social expectations, and isolation, each day trains in the Tokyo area are delayed due to hopeless people jumping on the tracks. The numbers have significantly reduced after Japan Railways began installing countermeasures such as platform doors and warning lights, but still, on average, there are over 20 incidents nationwide each week. The installation of platform doors has especially been highly effective since after the Yamanote line in Tokyo adopted them to most of their stations, the number of these incidents dropped to nearly zero. However, while the Tokyo government has a plan to install these barriers to every line in the city, due to semiconductor shortages, the plan is currently at risk. What I feel like people don't talk about often enough though is the emotional toll to commuters, not to mention the drivers, whenever an incident happens. It can be hard to sit there waiting for a long time, knowing full well what's happening outside the train. Of course, the ones who have it the worst are naturally the families of these people who now have to continue living without the loved one. But what's even more unsettling is the fact that in Japan, whenever someone jumps on the tracks, the railway companies have a tendency to demand tens of thousands of dollars of financial compensation from the victims' families for the repair work and the delay. And I can't even start to think about how it must feel to lose someone and then have a railway company demand compensation for your loss. Now I know that's a pretty heavy thing to think about, and it should be, because these are serious issues that matter. But if there's one thing we can be hopeful about, it's the fact that we live in a world where not every story about Japanese trains has to have a tragic ending. I feel like now is a good time we find what happened with Dylan. After he accidentally, on his way home from work, photobombed the picture the Toritetsu were trying to take, the video quickly started circulating online and became a huge news headline due to the reception it got. But to Dylan's surprise, people online weren't siding with the Toritetsu, since after all, they are known for being incredibly obnoxious people, and most commenters seemed to find it incredibly funny how he ended up ruining the picture of these train Karens. Almost overnight, Dylan became an incredibly popular meme on the Japanese internet, getting the nickname Enoden Shaniki, the Enoden Bicycle Bro, that ended up even being referenced in Shonen Jump, Japan's most popular manga publication. To find out more, I decided to visit his restaurant in the Kamakura area, and there was no better way to do so than to ride the famous Enoden line, though I have to say, it might be a bit too famous for my taste. To this day, thanks to the meme, his restaurant is one of the most popular in the area, enough so that people come there from all around Japan, and he has even started selling his own merch. And as someone who's now visited the Enoden Bicycle Bros restaurant myself, I can confidently say that the meme is not the only reason this place is so popular, since the food was also excellent. Now, even though I've listed a lot of problems in this video, it doesn't change the fact that Japanese trains are one of the greatest in the world. However, knowing about their problems doesn't make the experience any worse, it just makes us better prepared, more respectful, and ultimately a better guest in the country. So hopefully you learned something new, and since there's still a lot to talk about, consider subscribing so we can do this again.